She would be another Saint Teresa or a Saint Catherine of Siena, and I have for some time, quite a year, felt that that is her destiny, but we shall see. Other letters from Matthew have been preserved which prove conclusively that by the autumn of 1914, even his own family were growing alarmed by his consorting with these curious people, for on December 15th he wrote to Canon Ferrer, "My wife and her relations are bitterly hostile to our movement and to Theosophy. They have heard of various members of the Theosophical Society becoming associated with and friendly to us, and of my going on a few occasions to UW Upper Woburn Place. Their anger is not concealed. The truth is that Matthew had so many interests, and in the early spring of the following year, when most people were reading what the newspapers had to report about the British and French forces attacking the Turks in the Dardanelles, or rejoicing over the repulse of the Germans near Ypres, the Archbishop of London was devoting himself to careful observations on the flight of thrushes. He may well have been so preoccupied with ornithology and ornithoscopy that he was blissfully indifferent, for the moment, to either Theosophy or the irresponsible behavior of two of his hierarchy, now roaming around North America. On December 2nd, 1914, Bishop Bacon had raised to the episcopate a certain Thomas J. Bensley. On January 12, 1915, Bishop de Landesbergs et de Rache, whose titles and aristocratic manners may have assisted his acceptance in the Episcopal Church, assisted at the consecration of Hiram Richard Hulse as Bishop of Cuba. This missionary district had been erected in opposition to the Metropolitan See of San Cristobal de Habana, founded in 1787. So it was that without his authority, Matthew's old Catholic line of succession found its way into the Protestant Episcopal Church, giving a number of its clergy the belief that their orders were valid in the eyes of Rome. In the spring of 1915, Matthew's vivid imagination ran riot again. On May 11th, 4 days after the Cunard liner Lusitania had been torpedoed by a German submarine off Ireland, he wrote to the Reverend J.V. Macmillan, Archbishop Davidson's chaplain, offering to reconsecrate Dr. Winnington Ingram, Bishop of London. That same day he proclaimed, "The Catholic party and the established religion of Queen Elizabeth will be invited to come into union with us. For this work we received our mission from the spiritual descendant of the British apostle of the Netherlands, St. Willibrord. We are both willing and hopeful that the work may be carried on in union with the Holy See. If His Holiness Pope Benedict XV, who is a pontiff of high intelligence and profound learning, anxious to keep abreast of the times, will deign to listen to us and to assist us with his approval, His Holiness will have no reason to regret the confidence he may repose in us. In no other way can the British Empire be restored to Catholic unity." But Benedict XV was too much occupied to consider the friendly advice given him by the Metropolitan of the ancient Catholic Church of England, for on May 22nd, Italy declared war against Austria. By that date, Matthew had suddenly changed the name of his sect to the Old Roman Catholic Church. As a change for war news, John Bull devoted several pages to further revelations of Bishop Willoughby's morals, having managed to collect more scurrilous stories. This time Matthew did take notice. He ordered the titular Bishop of St. Pancras to attend a synod on May 19th, but the latter ignored the summons. His metropolitan dismissed him from the Old Roman Catholic Church and suspended him from the exercise of holy orders. Canon William's plea that the coadjutor might be reduced to lay status was rejected. Willoughby, backed up by his wife, who appears to have believed in his innocence, wrote to Matthew, pointing out that if legal action were taken against him, the results might be embarrassing for all concerned. It would certainly have been awkward for the old Roman Catholic Archbishop of London if it had come out in court that he had raised a half-unfrocked Anglican parson to the episcopate without taking the trouble to investigate the report that he had been found guilty of homosexual offenses. On the same day that Matthew suspended the Bishop of St. Pancras from holy orders and dismissed him from the old Roman Catholic Church, The Guardian printed a letter from the Reverend J.V. Macmillan, chaplain to the Primate of all England, and a memorandum thereon, with the caption, "An Episcopal Odyssey." The letter, addressed to the Right Reverend Bishop Matthew, said, I am directed by the Archbishop of Canterbury to send to you, in accordance with an intimation already given to you by the Bishop of London, a reply to certain recent letters which you have addressed to His Grace and to the Bishop of London. If the Archbishop understands the purport of these letters aright, their suggestion is that you and those who are at present associated with you should be regarded as constituting or representing the Holy Catholic Church in this country. The Church of England remaining as a religious body is associated with the national life, but with no claim to a regular or orthodox position in any ecclesiastical sense. You further suggest that the Bishop of London should submit himself to you for reordination, in which case you would be prepared, as the Archbishop understands, to grant him some official recognition. The Archbishop of Canterbury feels that it is hardly possible to treat these letters seriously, or to reply to them in terms which you would regard as more discourteous than the silence which you deprecate. But as you press for a reply, the Archbishop thinks it best that I should, on his behalf, enclose to you a memorandum recalling in bare outlines some of the incidents of the last 8 years. In view of the facts which are therein referred to, the Archbishop feels it to be impossible for him to enter with you into discussion of the subjects raised, or to regard your letters on these public matters as bearing a confidential character. He is quite willing, therefore, that you should make this letter and the memorandum public if you desire to do so, and he reserves to himself a similar discretion. The memorandum gave the essential facts of Matthew's spectacular career, from his preparation for the Anglican ministry, his ordination to the priesthood in the Church of Rome, 1877, his marriage in 1892, his readmission to the Church of England, and his temporary service under the name of Count Povaleri in a London curacy with the sanction of Bishop Temple. Step by step, the rest of his odyssey was followed. One paragraph read, after his complete breach with the Old Catholics of Holland in 1910, he describes himself as Catholic bishop, or again as Bishop of England and Ireland of the English Catholic Church, called a few weeks later the Western Orthodox Catholic Church in Great Britain and Ireland. Shortly afterwards, the title used is Archbishop of London. In March 1911, the title is Archbishop and Metropolitan of the English Catholic Church. This became the Catholic Church in England, Latin Uniate Branch, and 2 months later, the Catholic Church in England, Latin and Orthodox United. Under a leader described as Archbishop of England, and subsequently as Sa Grandeur Monseigneur A. H. Matthew, Archevêque de Lantre, Comte de Landau, Metropolitain de la Grande-Bretagne, et d'Irlande, évêque provisoire de l'Église catholique française. After this exposure by the Archbishop of Canterbury, any other man but Matthew would have wanted to hide himself, but he had been forgotten. But the Comte de Landau, Metropolitan de la Grande-Bretagne et d'Irlande, head of the Catholic Church in England, Latin and Orthodox United, felt the moment had now come for him to exercise what he believed to be his God-given authority as never before. At the suggestion of Canon Williams, he composed a pastoral letter which was promulgated from St. Willibrord's Oratory, 28 Red Lion Square, Bloomsbury, which had now replaced the ex-congregational chapel in Islington as the pro-cathedral of the so often renamed little sect. Dated the Feast of the Transfiguration, August 6, 1915, incidentally Matthew's 64th birthday, was ordered to be read in all churches at the principal Mass the following Sunday. The Metropolitan requested that each priest would, the following day, submit his assent to the orders contained in the said pastoral. In the strongest and most authoritative language, he definitely and absolutely forbade the reverend clergy and the faithful under his jurisdiction to join either the Theosophical Society or the Order of the Star in the East. If any priests or layfolk belonged to these organizations, they were to resign their membership at once. The Archbishop reminded them that it is not permitted to Catholics to accept such doctrines as the transmigration of souls or reincarnation. Neither may any Catholic admit the very painful and blasphemous assertion that our divine Lord Jesus Christ, far from being that which the Nicene Creed describes him to be, is simply the reincarnation of some other probably mythical personage. A proof that Matthew by this time was no more than a figurehead in the old Roman Catholic Church is given by the fact that none of his clergy, with the exception of Canon Williams, felt obliged to obey his orders. As to the laity, it is said that only 2 ladies resigned their membership of the Theosophical Society and the Order of the Star of the East as the result of the pastoral. In quick succession, both Canon Ferrer and Canon Wedgwood wrote to the Archbishop, saying that he had broken faith with them and that they must place their resignation in his hands. Neither of them were prepared to resign from these 2 organizations or from any other movement in which they found spiritual truth. Canon Ferrer demanded complete liberty of action to form his own judgments as to what he should believe or disbelieve. He was not prepared to accept the pastoral as an infallible ex cathedra statement or to treat Matthew as if he were pope. The Archbishop's next step was to dissolve the chapter on September 18th, and although the London clergy continued to use the oratory in Red Lion Square for their public services, the ancient Catholic Church of Ireland, the old Roman Catholic Church, and all their predecessors were reduced to a pile of heresy-haunted dust and rubble. The one-time Archbishop of London, Metropolitan of Great Britain and Ireland, in union with the Orthodox Patriarchates of Antioch and Alexandria, Count Povaleri de Vicenza, and 4th Earl of Llandaff, now found ample reasons for regarding himself as an early 20th century Athanasius, a father of orthodoxy, pillar of the Church, and champion of Christ's divinity. Like the 4th century Archbishop of Alexandria, he too had been forsaken by almost every one of his followers, priest and layfolk who had lapsed into heresy. Worse still, not one of the 7 bishops he had consecrated in the past 5 years had remained loyal to him. He deplored the fact that he had raised to the episcopate those 2 excommunicated Roman Catholic priests, Beale and Howarth. He could hardly find words strong enough to describe that scoundrel Willoughby. Then there was Bacon, who had retired into lay communion and publicly announced his break with the old Roman Catholic Church. Egerton, formerly a schoolmaster, had been reconciled with the Church of Rome and was now serving as a common soldier. There were rumors that Scott Hall had also submitted to the Holy See. Hinton had vanished to North America, where he had joined the Protestant Episcopal Church. Last but not least, there was Prince Bishop de Landas, Bergs et de Rache, of whom Lord Llandaff had had such high hopes. He had been forced to flee to the United States because he was an alien in danger of internment, and so long as the war lasted, he would have to remain on the other side of the Atlantic. Poor Matthew was driven nearly to desperation when 5 weeks after his pastoral had been issued on September 26th, the unfrocked Bishop of St. Pancras had the effrontery to consecrate 2 theosophists, Bernard Gauntlet and Robert King. To add to his troubles, the Countess was seeking a legal separation from her archiepiscopal spouse and claiming the custody of their 3 children. He himself was reduced to dire poverty because there were no ecclesiastical funds on which he could draw. To make matters worse, he had set aside his private income to his wife in return for a specified allowance, which she now refused to pay him. Unfortunately, no legal deed had ever been signed and witnessed to support his claim. Ethelbert Lodge, Bromley, Kent, rented from Bishop Bacon, which had been both the archiepiscopal curia and other suburban country estate of the Llandaffs for several years, had to be given up. His Grace and his domestic chaplain, Canon Williams, retired to more modest quarters at the Brambles, Kingsdown, a small village a mile south of Walmer on the coast of Kent. Having little to occupy their time, they set to work on composing a reply to the Archbishop of Canterbury's letter and memorandum published in The Guardian the previous May. It took the form of an open letter and was given the same title as that of the caption used by The Guardian, An Episcopal Odyssey. The pamphlet was headed with the words, Ergo inimicus vobis factus sum verum dicens vobis. In the prefatory note, Matthew explained, in order that it may be possible to form an opinion on the ingenious implications in the article in question. and incidentally of the good taste displayed in these documents and in their publication in the press, I reproduce them in extenso. An Episcopal Odyssey is a pathetic story from start to finish. It reveals the simplicity and naivete of its author and how again and again he was fooled by those he trusted. The final paragraph reads, "Our body is small and extremely poor, so poor indeed that its indigence defies description. My clergy receive no remuneration or emoluments whatsoever, and work without hope, and it would seem without prospect of any earthly reward for their labors. There is not a man at present with me who has not jeopardized his all, and some of my clergy have made sacrifices which they would not allow me to mention, in order to carry on the work which we honestly believe Almighty God has committed to us. As yet we see little result beyond failure and disappointment. The greatness of our work in the interest of reunion is the measure of our trial, and when we have proved ourselves more worthy, we may be blessed to the extent that our toil has not been wholly in vain. The movement will go on in spite of all difficulties, and notwithstanding the persecution and scorn of our enemies, however severe it may be. During the autumn of 1915, when the Archbishop and his private secretary were living alone at the Brambles, the British and French forces were being gradually driven off the Gallipoli Peninsula. Unless one is mistaken, the body about which Matthew wrote with such pathos then consisted of nobody but himself and his domestic chaplain, though there may have been a few layfolk who still remained loyal to their rejected metropolitan. It is a pity that he did not give the actual numbers of those clergy who were said to be working without any remuneration or hope of earthly reward. On December 18th, the Archbishop of the Old Roman Catholic Rite in Great Britain and Ireland, de jure 4th Earl of Llandaff of Thomastown, County Tipperary, as he is described on the cover and title page of an Episcopal Odyssey, appointed Canon Williams as Grand Vicar. About a fortnight later, a notice was sent out that the rite had been closed down. On December 31st, he added his signature to printed copies of an act of submission to His Holiness Pope Benedict XV and posted them to his friends. This 3-page leaflet starts with the words, "Having spent 2 months, beginning from the 18th of October 1915, in almost uninterrupted solitude and retreat, in order that I might devote much prayer and study to a careful reconsideration of the position I was induced in 1907 to adopt, in relation to a movement which appeared likely to help forward the return of our nation to the faith of our forefathers, it behooves me to inform my friends of the result of this period of serious contemplation." Having explained in detail how he had been brought back to a belief in the primacy of the Roman pontiff as the successor of St. Peter and its fundamental importance, he went on, "When a man perceives clearly that he has blundered or been misled, it is his obvious duty, at no matter what sacrifice, to acknowledge the fact. This I am now doing, by offering my contrition with humble, unconditional, and entire submission to His Holiness, Pope Benedict XV. I have therefore sent my petition for absolution from censures and for restoration to the visible unity of the Church to His Eminence Cardinal Mary del Val, Prefect of the Holy Office." On January 8, 1916, the following notice appeared in the tablet. The Reverend Arnold Harris Matthew, whose submission to the Holy See has already been announced, writes to us with regard to his position as follows. Although the orders of the Dutch schismatical clergy were, down to 1910, undisputed in Rome, I make no claim to be regarded as a bishop, or to exercise episcopal functions, or to use any episcopal insignia. I desire to conform in everything to whatever may be the commands or wishes of the Holy See. Neither do I intend to claim even to exercise priestly functions, unless and until, as I earnestly hope, this privilege may be permitted to me. It is my firm resolve, which nothing will ever alter, to obey the commands of the Holy Father, whose word I am perfectly willing to await, and I shall do nothing whatsoever, either publicly or privately, in any ecclesiastical matters, without the permission of superiors. About the same time that this statement appeared in the tablet, Canon Williams, still holding his status as Grand Vicar and styling himself Administrator of the vacant see, informed readers of The Guardian that the old Catholic movement in Britain had been wound up. 33 years after this event, Archbishop Matthew's successor as Metropolitan explained that his reason for making his announcement was that the Theosophical clergy had seized the opportunity offered by Matthew's sudden and unexpected resignation to claim that they themselves constituted the old Roman Catholic Church. He stated that he himself was far from sure that his ecclesiastical superior would burn his boats, recalling how often in the past he had changed his mind at the last moment. He also suspected that Matthew would demand reasonable terms before he made his submission to the Holy See, and that he was not nearly so sanguine as he was as to the fulfillment of the conditions which he had been led to expect as almost certain to be granted. Evidently, the terms proposed by Benedict XV, Cardinal Mary del Val, more likely Cardinal Byrne, were not considered reasonable. The Archbishop, encouraged by his Grand Vicar, came to the conclusion that it was his duty to revive that moribund remnant of the old Roman Catholic Church in Great Britain and Ireland, which had not been perverted by theosophical heresies. On March 5, 1916, in order to prevent confusion with the schismatic clergy, he renamed his sect the Western Uniate Catholic Church. By the first Sunday in Lent, 1916, he had resumed his purple cassock and archiepiscopal regalia. That firm resolve which nothing will ever alter had lasted no more than 2 months. Even more incredible, considering all that he had said in the past about the invalidity of Anglican orders, and that more than once he had informed the Archbishop of Canterbury that the Church of England had no claim to be the Catholic Church in this country, and that its bishops were merely state officials, was his writing to Dr. Davidson to suggest that his little flock should become a sort of Anglican Uniate Church. With an equal lack of consistency, he made up his mind at the same time to raise Canon Williams to the episcopate. On March 25th, a reply came from Dr. Davidson, asking Matthew to visit him at Canterbury any day convenient to him for a friendly talk. To quote from what the bishop-elect wrote in after years, both the Archbishop and I were very puzzled as to what could be behind this move. Previously, Dr. Davidson had circulated both here and in the United States of America a very damaging statement, which had called a memorandum, which contained many false statements with regard to Archbishop Matthew. The latter requested me to prepare a reply to this memorandum. I did so, and copies were sent to the Holy Father, the King, many of the cardinals, high officers of state, a number of important dignitaries in this country, and every Anglican bishop throughout the world. Mr. Davidson was taken by surprise. It was undoubtedly the greatest blow to his prestige he had ever received, and if Archbishop Matthew had not himself ruined its effect by his ill-timed and precipitate offer of submission to the Holy See, which had been urged upon him by certain Catholic ecclesiastics, who themselves composed the terms on which his submission was offered, our freedom from further Anglican molestation would have been secured. 5 days later, Matthew wrote to his friend Alan Hay, the vicar of South Mimms, explaining what an advantage it would be for the Church of England to be in communion with the Western Uniate Catholic Church, just as he had formerly pointed out to Cardinal Mary del Val the benefits such a union would confer upon the Church of Rome. He said, "I had given up all hope of that when I made up my mind to offer to submit to Papa, but Papa's merry deputy is a Spaniard, and appropriately an inquisitor, and I never liked the Inquisition or the Inquisitor in any shape." Hay was asked to besiege heaven that the meeting with the Archbishop of Canterbury would have the desired result. All depends on that. On the Feast of the Seven Sorrows of Our Lady, April 14th, 1916, Archbishop Matthew raised to the episcopate Bernard Mary Williams as his perpetual coadjutor with right of succession. The ceremony took place in the private oratory of the Brambles, Kingsdown. The following morning, the two prelates went to Canterbury, but the interview between the two archbishops took place alone. For, to quote the words of the newly consecrated coadjutor, Dr. Davidson was well aware that he could not attain his object were I present. Williams always seems to have had a tremendous idea of his influence in the affairs of the old Roman Church. Davidson told Matthew, not mincing his words, that his relation successively to the Church of England, then to the Church of Rome, then to the Church of England again, then to the Old Catholics, then to the Eastern Church, then to the independent organization under his leadership, then to the Church of Rome again, and now to the Church of England again, gave a story of loyalties and disloyalties which, in his opinion, was incompatible with any adequate sense of the responsibilities belonging to membership in an organized body which has Christ as its head. The Primate of all England remarked that he could not in honesty refrain from pointing out to Archbishop Matthew the position in which men had been placed who had been ordained or consecrated by him. Whether validly or invalidly, what was their position now? He reminded Matthew that he had purported to consecrate at least 8 bishops, and that he had ordained many more men to the priesthood. He could not understand why this utterly irresponsible prelate had now written to him, stating that he had decided to terminate the organization, and asked, "Is this a tolerable position to maintain?" While the Archbishop of Canterbury was reprimanding the Metropolitan of the Western Uniate Catholic Church, Old Roman Catholic Rite, the newly consecrated coadjutor was waiting impatiently in a Canterbury hotel. 33 years afterwards, he recalled that meeting. Archbishop Matthew should not have accepted a private verbal apology for such a worldwide injury, but such was his guilelessness, foolishness if you will, that he did so and agreed, at Dr. Davidson's very earnest request, to arrest the further issue of our reply to his memorandum, which had not at that time reached the hands of the general public. Dr. Davidson, and not Archbishop Matthew, then suggested as a quid pro quo that a way should be found in which Archbishop Matthew and his clergy should cooperate, that was the word used by Dr. Davidson, with the Anglican Communion, with Archbishop Matthew in due course. Mrs. Davidson sent a telephone message expressing her regret that she had been prevented from returning in time to preside at tea, as she had intended to do, and which I had impressed upon him the necessity of declining. Archbishop Matthew returned immediately to the hotel where I awaited him, and before all else a precise account of this important interview was written down for record, so that there might be no mistake with regard to any particular concerning it at any future time. It is difficult not to be amused at the attitude of the Lord Archbishop of Caerglo to give Williams the title he assumed in after years, and it is interesting to compare his account of that important interview with Matthew's recollections of it, given in a letter to Allen Hay dated April 19, 1916, i.e., 4 days after it took place. "I was never more agreeably surprised in my life than I was by my interview with the Archbishop. I have rarely met anyone who received me with greater feelings of respect and reverence, and I feel that doctrinally he is on all essential points quite what one would wish, though he may not be au fait at matters of ceremonial or attach much importance to externals. After all, such things are purely secondary, and if the faith is right, the rest is of minor consequence. He seemed to me to be very liberal-minded, and what impressed me most of all was his humility, which edified me extremely. I think him a really fine character, one who could not be easily replaced when he goes to his reward. For some strange reason, the great historic throne in Canterbury Cathedral has been placed on the wrong side and in the wrong place. The Archbishop in a suitable mitre, and on his throne in the right place, would make a very imposing figure as the spiritual chief of the Church of England. But Bishop Williams did not trust Archbishop Davidson, and after he and Archbishop Matthew got back to Kingsdown, he continued to stress that it was not safe to believe the Primate of all England, although from the point of view of doctrine he might be what one would wish. Although he had never met the Primate, he was convinced that he was undoubtedly wholly insincere, and that, in his opinion, there were 1,000 reasons against Old Roman Catholics, or Western Uniate Catholics, having anything to do with the Church of England. After all, how could Catholics consort with Protestants? What right had a Protestant Archbishop of Canterbury, whose orders were almost certainly invalid, to impose terms on a Catholic prelate, who by the grace of God was Archbishop of the London district of the Old Roman Catholic Church and Metropolitan? In the end, Matthew acted on the advice of his coadjutor and decided that the whole thing was preposterous. Ecclesia Anglicana was dismissed as beneath contempt. The Western Catholic Uniate Church must be extended, and so at Kingsdown, on the Feast of the Visitation of Our Lady, July 1st, 1916, James Columba McFall was consecrated as Bishop for Ireland. Looking back on this incident in 1949, Williams wrote, "In this unfortunate matter of providing a bishop for work in Ireland, Archbishop Matthew was overborne. I would have prevented this had I known of the negotiations on time, but he had been persuaded that since this bishop was required for Ireland, the matter need not be referred to me. Since our jurisdiction does not extend to Ireland, the Irish bishop's consecration is irregular, and he is not recognized by this right." What Matthew had written about the indigence of his clergy was certainly applicable to himself by the summer of 1916. He and his wife had now separated by mutual consent. For 2 years she had discontinued paying him his allowance. There seemed to be little or no hope that the de jure Earl of Llandaff would ever obtain possession of the vast Irish estates of Thomastown, situated in the Golden Vale, with the river Swere flowing to the east. It was here that one of his wealthy 18th century ancestors had built a splendid mansion, in which he dispensed lavish hospitality to 40 guests so long as they cared to stay with him. This manner of life would have just suited the Archbishop, even more so his wife. Not knowing what to do next, he toyed with the idea of retiring to a cave in the chalk cliffs near the South Foreland to lead an eremitical life, and so prepare for death, celebrating Mass in solitude and keeping body and soul alive on a few beans, a little oil, and water. At the same time, realizing that he had had no luck with the Archbishop of Canterbury, Matthew made a desperate appeal to the Bishop of Durham to give him a benefice, explaining that he was quite prepared to be reordained conditionally if this would make things easier. But Dr. Moule, a devout evangelical who was first principal of Ridley Hall, Cambridge, reminded the former Archbishop of London that he was validly ordained already, being in Roman Catholic orders. By this time, Matthew seems to have grown aggressively anti-Roman and strongly pro-Anglican. Judging from the letter he wrote to Alan Hay on May 16, 1916, "My one desire has all along been to try to do something for reunion. Rome slams her doors in my face, and I will listen to nothing but the most groveling submission and subservience. There should be a little public decency somewhere, and an act of union should be publicly made, and signed by those who would, if allowed to do so, come with me. There might be several priests and 1 or 2 bishops. As might have been expected, nothing came of this dream to unite a handful of Anglican clergy with the Western Uniate Catholic Church. On March 25, 1917, the indigent bishop, who had been forsaken by all but a very few friends, drew up a document addressed to Bernard Mary Williams, giving him the style of Old Catholic Bishop of the Western District. He wrote, "In the event of my relinquishment of the charge communicated to me at my consecration at Utrecht on the 28th of April, 1908, or in the event of my death, I wish that you may take the place in relation to the movement which then will be vacated by me. The register of ordinations and any other papers, etc., there may be, which relate to the movement, will be handed over to you." The reference to his consecration at Utrecht and the movement suggests that Matthew had suddenly put himself back in imagination to the status of Old Catholic Legionary Bishop for England. Bishop Williams managed to raise enough money to maintain his metropolitan in reasonable comfort, though hardly what his exalted position demanded. New quarters were found for the Archbishop in Lee's cottage, Walmer, Kent. Once again he began to correspond with Dr. Davidson, requesting permission to officiate in Anglican churches. The primate refused to consider the idea and told him that if he were formally admitted to communion with Canterbury, he would have to be satisfied with the status of a layman. Matthew also appealed to the Bishop of London, and his letters were sent to the Archbishop Davidson. On September 12, 1917, the latter wrote to the former, "The story has now become a pathetic one. It is pitiable to think of Bishop Matthew's desertion by the lady whom he wrote about as Countess of Llandaff, and whose picture he sent to us with pride. What is meant by her being able to claim the control of her children if she deserts her husband, I do not in the least understand. The pamphlet about his his earldom and the pictures of his countess look strangely now. It is also pathetic that he should now find himself in financial straits, if that is indeed so. I fear that the fomenting of schisms and the founding of churches have involved much expenditure on someone's part, both in East and West, and it is possible that this has hit him hard. I feel intensely sorry for him, foolish and harmful as his doings have been. Bishop Matthew is, to the best of my belief, though of course I speak without knowledge of what is said by his wife or anyone else against him, a virtuous old fellow, with a delightfully attractive manner, a fine appearance, a certain amount of ecclesiastical learning, and a strange lack of balance. His harmfulness has lain in the real lightness, strenuously as he denies it, with which he has played fast and loose with great questions of church order, and thus set going, in different ways and in different lands, schisms which it may take many years to heal. He has given to ecclesiastical adventures less honest than himself an example fraught with abundant peril. None the less, I have a personal regard for him, and although he has only himself to thank for his present position, I should like to be able to help him in some way which did not do harm to the church wherein I am set to be a responsible custodian of what is right. I should certainly fail as such a custodian if I were to say now that neither you nor any other bishop whom I have met would wish me to say that after all that has passed, we propose to recognize him as one who might rightly hold the trust of ministry in the Church of England. Various people suggested suitable jobs for this venerable founder of churches. Some felt it would be safe enough to make him the chaplain to a hospital or home, others a secretary or librarian. But Dr. Davidson was adamant that such posts would be dangerous, remarking that Matthew was not the sort of man to fit in appropriately to work of a secretarial sort. As to placing him as a duly accredited priest of the Church of England in charge of the religious life of a public institution, Dr. Davidson was certain that, so far as he could judge, it would be wholly wrong. Nevertheless, Archbishop Matthew still had such a high opinion of himself, believing that he was in an utterly different category to other prelates of autocephalous churches in England, that he wrote to his coadjutor, Monsignor Williams, on November 17, 1917, grumbling about the schismatic activities of Bishops Marsh Edwards, Vernon Hereford, ACA, McLellan, J.C. Whitebrook, James McFall, and Stevens the Patriarch, dismissing them with the words, "What a crew!" Moreover, from the point of view of the Most Reverend, the Right Honorable Archbishop, none of these over-the-border prelates were fit to consort socially with the direct descendant of Gwaithfed, a legendary chieftain of Gwent, the progenitor of Matthew of Llandaff in the reign of Richard II, from whom sprung the lines of Matthew of Anfield, Turles, and Thomastown in Ireland, as well as those of Matthew of Castle Umbunach in South Wales. Had Matthew made another attempt to be reconciled with the Church of Rome, it would have been more difficult to regularize his position. The truth which he appears to have forgotten is that he had ordained the Western District of Scotland in 1877, and that he had been found guilty of many canonical crimes and offences since he lapsed into Unitarianism in 1889. Most of the censures and vindictive penalties, as they are termed in the Codex Juris Canonici, that affected him were reserved to the Holy See. The former Father Matthews had continued to break the laws of the Catholic and Roman Church by taking a wife in 1892, and later on getting himself raised to the episcopate in a schismatic body. The one-time Anglican theological student and priest of the Latin Rite had indeed wrecked his life, though, as Archbishop Davidson remarked, he has only himself to thank for his present position. Even if no church wanted him as either a priest or a prelate, there were social functions to which he was welcome because of his alleged earldom. It must have given him great satisfaction to be invited to a private reception held in Bayswater to honor the 92nd birthday of the Empress Eugene. The Independence Belge reported on May 10, 1919, that among those present were Monsignor L'Archevêque, Marquis de Povaleri, Comte de Llandaff, who was accompanied by his son, Comte de Povaleri, Viscount Matthew, and his daughter, Lady Margarita Matthew. Other distinguished royal and noble guests were La Princesse Sahila d'Egypte, le Prince Comtesse d'Albanie, la Princesse Paléologue, Prince Paul Salvatore de Pologne, la Princesse Alistiane, la Princesse Sophie Dulipsing, le Prince Ferdinand Tian, et la Princesse Karina Barclay de Tully. The one-time friend and consecrator of Rudolph Francis Edward St. Patrick Alphonsus Ghislain de Gramont Hamilton de Lorraine Brabant, Prince de Landis Berge et de Rach, and Duc de St. Winoc, must have been in his element at that aristocratic soiree, hobnobbing with the minor royalty of Europe. He must have been as happy as Frank Harris at the fabulous dinner party he arranged at Claridge's in 1891 for Princess Alice of Monaco, widow of the Duc de Richelieu, at which Oscar Wilde and George Moore had enlivened the conversation. No doubt it recalled the far-off days when, as the Reverend Count Pavaleri, he had played the part of a curate at a fashionable West End Anglican church. The scene described is almost evocative of a Ronald Furbank novel or an Edwardian Ruritanian musical comedy at Daly's Theatre. What a marvelous drawing Aubrey Beardsley could have made of Monseigneur l'Archevêque Marquis de Pavaleri Comte de Landulph in his Cappa Magna, worthy of those he did to illustrate Mademoiselle de Maupin. Once again he had renewed his correspondence with Archbishop Davidson, and 2 months before the Bayswater party, the latter had reminded him in much the same words as on previous occasions, "You have been in a very marked way, quite conscientiously and genuinely, a promoter of schism in the true sense of that word. Your ecclesiastical position is different to what it has been, and you claim at my hands a recognition which would be met on your part by the kind of declaration of allegiance to Anglicanism which you desire to make. The question, however, is what line ought the Anglican bishops to take towards one who during a considerable series of years set on foot and promoted what cannot, I think, be fairly regarded otherwise than a schismatic church in England." Matthew could not or would not understand this point of view. He continued to build castles in the air with cloud-capped towers, paranoiacally refusing to face up to reality. He seems to have felt that the Anglican bishops were persecuting him, whereas most of them hardly knew that he existed, or if they did, regarded him as a pathetic eccentric. In September 1919, he wrote to Dr. Davidson, almost accusing him of libel and defamation of character, saying, "I have endured 30 years' persecution at the hands of certain people, and at the close of life this assault comes as a blow from one whom I wish to look upon with respect, if not as a friend." By this time Allen Hay, vicar of South Mimms, had provided him with a home in a cottage in the village. Here the venerable white-haired prelate worshipped in the parish church, but only as one of the congregation. The ritual and ceremonial were more ornate than what he had ever managed to achieve in either of his little so-called pro-cathedrals, but permission was never asked on his behalf from the Bishop of London for him to celebrate the communion service. The vicar did inquire if the bishop would allow the old man to sit in choir wearing his episcopal robes and insignia. There was no question of his pontificating. Still regarding himself as an honorary prelate of the Order of Corporate Reunion, an office he had accepted in 1912, Matthew accepted it as his duty to validate the orders of any Anglican clergyman who sought him out in his retreat at South Mimms. These clandestine ceremonies conducted in the cottage included conditional baptism and confirmation. It was understood that no fee or reward of any description must be offered or would be accepted by the Archbishop for services rendered. How many secret ordinations were performed during the summer and autumn of 1919 is not known, but letters prove that early in December a certain Anglican chaplain in the BEF was able to sail for the Far East with the feeling that he was a real priest. It is possible that Matthew performed another of these surreptitious ordinations on December 19th. He died suddenly the following day. The Vigil of St. Thomas, the Doubting Apostle. Unlike Charles Maurice de Talleyrand Périgord, Bishop of Autun in 1838, the Most Reverend, the Right Honourable Earl of Llandaff, had no Catholic niece at hand to call in a priest before his death, so he never got the chance to make a solemn declaration in which he openly disavowed the great errors which had troubled and afflicted the Catholic Apostolic and Roman Church, and in which he himself had had the misfortune to fall. As a would-be member of the established church, he was buried with Anglican rites near the south door of the village church. The wording on his tombstone is as follows: "Of your charity pray for the good estate of Arnold Harris Matthew, Doctor of Divinity, Bishop of the Old Catholic Church, de jure Earl of Llandaff in Thomastown, County Tipperary, who entered into rest 20th of December 1919. Behold a great priest, who in his days pleased God and was found just. As he died unshriven and unhouseled, it is somewhat doubtful whether his epitaph can be correctly applied to such an erratic and unfortunate individual, but it is not for us to judge him. Only God can judge the hearts of men. It is best to leave Arnold Harris Matthew with the prayer, "May he rest in peace." Within a few hours of his death, his register was got hold of by some interested parties, said to be Anglican clergymen, without permission of Bishop Williams. This register has been recovered, and it contains several disguised erasures, but no ostensible references to the consecrations of Lambert and Charter. A copy of the register, made by the Archbishop himself, was given to Williams before the former's death. In this he states that he had performed no consecrations than those indicated. Matthew's episcopal seal, some documents and other papers also disappeared mysteriously. Thus any document with his seal would not in itself be a proof of consecration or ordination. Nevertheless, there would seem to be sufficient evidence that 2 or 3 Anglican clergymen did receive the episcopate from his hands, though, for obvious reasons, they kept it secret. Chapter 7. Churches claiming the Ferret succession. Ancient British Church, United Armenian Catholic Church, Free Protestant Episcopal Church of England, Free Catholic Church, Apostolic Catholic Church, English Orthodox Church, English Episcopal Church, South African Episcopal Church, Indian Orthodox Church, Evangelical Church of England, Western Orthodox Catholic Church, etc. Whereas the Vallot and Matthew streams are well authenticated and documented, the Ferret succession is very weak and satisfactory proof of its relation to the bodies mentioned in this chapter. So far as can be discovered, no convincing evidence has ever been produced, proving a clear link between these sects and Mar Julius, Bishop of Iona, and with the Jacobite Patriarch of Antioch. On the other hand, it could be that still earthbound spirits, as yet unready for the great return, have delivered messages, just as they are alleged to have done to the psychic archaeologist Frederick Bly Bond, that the Syrian and Celtic churches really were quite closely connected. If, as did the credulous Father Ignatius of Lanthony, one is prepared to accept the theory that the British people are ultimately descended from the 10 Israelite tribes, which were taken captive into Assyria in 722 to 721 BC, and thereafter wholly disappeared from Hebrew history, then it is not so difficult to believe in the medieval legends of the Holy Grail. They relate how St. Joseph of Arimathea found his way from Palestine to Britain, founded a church in the Vale of Avalon, where rites and ceremonies were performed like those of the Syro-Egyptian church. St. Joseph said to have been the emissary of St. Mark the Evangelist. There could be a substance of truth in these legends, because serious historians are usually agreed that the Copts before the Moslem conquest of Egypt were great travelers, that a colony of them settled on the Isle of Lerins, where some found their way to Ireland. So it may be that the dormant consciousness of those who accept the Grail and similar legends has received messages by automatic writing or other similar psychic methods not approved by the Roman Church, that an invisible and intangible Syro-Egyptian church survived, like a Rip Van Winkle in England, for roughly 1800 years, waiting until some magician's wand could awaken it again. No matter, it is safer not to accept these fascinating tales on their face value. They may be true, but we cannot be sure. So far as external and objective evidence is concerned, however, the story only begins with the arrival in England of Leon Shishemian in 1885. Previous to this, everything is more or less a mirage. He claimed to have fled from Asia before the advancing wave of Turkish persecution, in which the Armenians were the chief victims. He was utterly destitute, and for between times earned his living in a stable and within sandwich boards. Appeals to both Dr. Temple, Bishop of London, and Dr. Benson, Archbishop of Canterbury, led to nothing, and this impoverished Armenian was driven to desperation. Having had no luck with the Anglicans, Shishemian managed to find the money to pay his fare to Edinburgh, where he was welcomed with open arms by the Scottish Reformation Society. Then, as now, constrained by motives of conscience to expose the evils of Romanism, he lived on the charity of some of its members, attended St. Luke's Free Kirk, and improved his English by studying at New College, a Presbyterian theological establishment. He was given an enthusiastic reception at the annual meeting of this society on March 7, 1887, and was exhibited as an innocent Protestant victim of the sinister power of Romanism, and earnestly commended to the kindness of sincere Christians, for he had no other means of support. In April 1887, the Bulwark, the official organ of the Scottish Reformation Society, published the first of a series of articles in which Sheshemian told the story of what he regarded as a miraculous conversion. He related that as a boy he had been forced to join the Armenian Uniat Church, and so fell into the clutches of the Scarlet Woman. Pious Presbyterians must have reveled in lurid revelations of clerical scandals which presented popery as they had always supposed it to be. This spiritual Aeneid recorded how Sheshemian had received all the minor and major orders within a week. After his ordination to the priesthood at Malatia in 1866, he was appointed to several parishes in Armenia. Had he not been a person of unusual ability, it is doubtful if he would have managed to acquire the rank of Vartapet in 1878. His memories contain stories of difficulties with bishops as well as of immorality among the priests. By 1881, Sheshemian had escaped from Armenia and was in Constantinople. Here he tried to get financial help from the Anglican chaplain by expressing his detestation of popery while still celebrating the Armenian liturgy in the Church of St. John Chrysostom at Pera. After many adventures, he managed to effect his escape from Turkey and reached England with little more than the clothes he wore. He complained bitterly of the cruel way he was treated by both the Bishop of London and the Archbishop of Canterbury, explaining that this was because God made their hearts harder than stones. He quoted a letter from Dr. Temple dated June 4, 1886, in which the bishop pointed out that he had not invited this Armenian priest to London and could not undertake to maintain him. So Sheshemian said that the curse of Judas, which was given from God, had been inherited by these two Anglican bishops, also by Mr. Curtis, the Church of England chaplain at Constantinople. Nowhere in these memories did Sheshemian claim to have been raised to the episcopate. He recorded how he was ordained a priest and was made a Vartapet, using the word doctor as more intelligible to Scottish Presbyterian readers. After about 2 years in Scotland, the former Uniat ecclesiastic went over to Ireland, where in May 1889 he conducted services in Berry Street Church and St. Enoch's Church, Belfast. A newspaper reported that Dr. Sheshemian enjoys the confidence of and is warmly recommended by the most eminent men in the Presbyterian Church of Scotland, but he is also well in favor with the Anglican Church, being permitted to preach in the Church of Ireland by permission of the Archbishop of Armagh in Dublin, and in the Church of England by the Archbishop of Canterbury and the Bishop of London. The latter recommended him as a bishop of a church other than the established church. This last statement suggests that Dr. Temple was not aware of the precise status of a Vartapet, or did Sheshemian mislead him? Shortly after this, a pamphlet was published entitled An Eastern Steps from Darkness to Light. Sheshemian's apologia greatly moved the 4th Baron Plunkett, then Archbishop of Dublin. In 1890, he received the ex-Armenian Catholic priest into the Church of England and licensed him as a clergyman of the diocese. Nevertheless, there is a strange story, told by Margeorges and others, for which no documentary evidence has been produced. So far as is known, that on August 15, 1890, Sheshemian founded what he called the United Armenian Catholic Church in the British Isles, and constituted himself as its first primate. About the same time, the mysterious Mar Theophilus Stevens appeared out of the clouds, more correctly from a back street in Hackney. What he had been doing other than playing the organ since his alleged consecration by Mar Pelagius Morgan in 1879 is uncertain, but fortunately he had a wife who was able to support him. There is a tale that sometime in 1890, Stevens assisted Bishop A.S. Richardson, formerly of the Reformed Episcopal Church in the United States, laid hands on Sheshemian. So far as is known, no instrument of consecration has ever been produced. What appears to be a recent addition to the story handed down by prelates of the Ferret succession is that Sheshemian was given the title of Mar Leon, Archbishop of Selsey, in the ancient British Church. It is difficult not to suspect that the whole tale must be apocryphal. If this consecration was carried out sub conditionae, as is usually stated, then it looks as if neither Stevens nor Richardson realized that a Vartapet has no episcopal status, actually a doctor of divinity exercising the office of an archdeacon. In any case, they could only give to this Armenian, who had been ordained priest by a bishop in communion with the Holy See, such episcopal orders whose validity would be questioned by many, since Richardson's orders derived from the Protestant Episcopal Church. There appears to be no documentary proof of either Morgan or Stephen's consecrations, and no clear knowledge of what rite was used, although there is a tale that the East Syrian rite was adopted for each ceremony. Thus, Chechemian is the very narrow bottleneck through which the alleged Syro-Jacobite Ferret succession has been transmitted to our day, and many would think the transmission of doubtful value. The Free Protestant Episcopal Church of England, of which Chechemian was the first archbishop after its foundation in 1897, avoids the difficulty of stating incorrectly that on April 23, 1878, the Reverend Leon Chechemian was consecrated Bishop of Malatya in the great Cathedral of Malatya by the Archbishop Churchurunian and received the titles Most Honorable Lord Doctor and Very Reverend. The mystery is increased by the entry in Crockford's Clerical Directory for 1893, which reads as follows: Chechemian Leon, University of South Lebanon, Honorable Doctor of Divinity by Archbishop of Malatya, 1878. Deacon and Priest, 1866, Malatya. Received into Church of Ireland, 1890. General License, Diocese of Dublin, 4th of November, 1890. Formerly Priest at Besui, 1866-68. Aintab, 1868. Gurum, 1868 through 1877. Malatya, 1868 through 1877. Malatya, 1878 through 1881. Constantinople, 1881 through 1885. 18 Hume Street, Dublin. As might be expected, there is no reference to his also holding the positions of primate of the United Armenian Catholic Church and Archbishop of Selsey in the ancient British Church. Both Stevens and Chechemian had some very curious friends in the ecclesiastical underworld of the early 90s. Among them was a pious cycle dealer named James Martin, Doctor of Divinity, LLD. Not satisfied with any organized form of Protestantism, he had founded the Nazarene Episcopal Ecclesia, which may have been inspired by the early Christian Jewish group of this name. The tiny sect with a British Israelite ethos had its first headquarters in Flaxman Road, alongside Loughborough Junction Station on the old London Chatham and Dover Railway. In 1890, Mr. Martin moved his disciples to Kent House Road, Sydenham, near the Crystal Palace, where he opened a seminary known as Nazarene College. It has been said that he had received a laying on of hands by Bishop Richardson of the Reformed Episcopal Church in the USA. Also, that later on he sometimes signed his letters Antipus F.D., Fide Defensor. Little or nothing has been recorded of Chechemian's movements between 1890 and 1897, and it is uncertain how long his headquarters were in Dublin. It has been stated that it was in the latter year that he managed to get legally constituted what was called the Free Protestant Episcopal Church of England. This was an amalgamation of the ancient British Church, the Nazarene Episcopal Ecclesia, and the Free Protestant Church of England. It has been stated that sometime in 1897, Chechemian, now known to be initiated as Archbishop of Selsey, raised James Martin to the episcopate, with the title of Archbishop of Caerleon upon Usk. We are also told that he reconsecrated Charles Stevens, at that time chief patriarch of the famous church alleged to have been founded in AD 33 by Caractacus, bishop of the Silures, an ancient British tribe, about 5 centuries before St. Augustine and his Italian missionaries drove this venerable church underground. Far be it from us to deny the truth of these Celtic legends, for it may be that they were transmitted to the chronicler from beyond the veil, like the messages from the masters received on the astral by Bishops Wedgwood and Leadbader of the Liberal Catholic Church. On Guy Fawkes Day, 1897, the new Protestant sect, claiming early Celtic origins, was given another overseer in the person of Charles Albert McLaughlin, with the title of Colonel Missionary Bishop for Cape Colony and Bishop of Claremont. At the ceremony held in St. Stephen's Church, East Ham, Chechemian was assisted by Martin and by 2 other bishops upon whom he had recently laid hands, G.W.L. Mayers and F. Busher. The idea seems to have been that McLaughlin should transplant this new form of legally constituted Protestantism in South Africa and thus checked the growth of ritualism and sacerdotalism in the South African province of the Anglican Communion, but he never took possession of his see. The greater part of his long life was spent in East London, where he devoted himself to many kinds of charitable work among the poor and the outcast. In recent years, certain writers, anxious to stress the Catholicity and orthodoxy of the ancient British Church, have given MacLachlan the title of Mar Andres to keep up the Syro-Jacobite tradition of the Bishop of Iona. It is extremely doubtful, however, if the titular Bishop of Claremont took any interest in the Eastern churches. It is a pity that the archives of the ancient British Church, presumably now filed with those of the Nazarene Episcopal Ecclesia and the Free Protestant Church of England, cannot produce documentary evidence of Stevens, Chichemian, Martin, and MacLachlan using the titles of Mar Theophilus, Mar Leon, Mar Jacobus, and Mar Andres. A photograph of these three bishops shows them robed in linen rochets with balloon-shaped sleeves, black scarves, and university hoods. Each carries a tasseled college cap or mortarboard. The only oriental features are the bushy beards and the flowing mustaches which all display. The more one reflects on the combination of rigid Protestantism with fascinating legends of the ancient British Patriarchate and its affiliated organizations, autocephalous tropoi, etc., one cannot help suspecting that a later generation of chroniclers wanted them to be true and accepted them as true. The wish was father to the thought. Mar Theophilus, the second British patriarch, helped to augment his income as organist at a chapel in Mare Street, Hackney. His wife contributed £200 a year toward the upkeep of this dissenting place of worship, an annuity which ceased at her death about 1900. According to the late Bishop William Hall, there is no reference to Mar Theophilus in the archives of the Free Protestant Episcopal Church before 1898. We are told that Stevens was grossly unfit for a minister and was only good for a church organist, for he had a dreadful impediment in his speech that rendered him quite useless. He always used the Book of Common Prayer for making deacons, priests, and bishops. After his wife's death, he found another pro-cathedral for the ancient British Church in Speldhurst Road, South Hackney, just north of Victoria Park, known later on as the Church of Martin Luther. The second British patriarch died in 1916 and was laid to rest by the future Bishop Hall in Norwood Cemetery. The ritual and ceremonial at the burial service were those of the Free Protestant Episcopal Church of England. The pure Protestant character of the Chichemian line of apostolic succession was perpetuated by the third British patriarch, Mar Jacobus I, Martin, who on the feast of St. James of Compostela, July 25, 1915, priested William Hall in the corrugated iron chapel near Kent House Station, Peng, adjacent to Nazarene College. That same day was also ordained Misters Asquith, Harris, and Surridge. Benjamin Charles Harris was hurriedly made a bishop with only extemporary prayers, having been a priest for 5 minutes before he was raised to the episcopate. He was given the title of Bishop of Essex, though, as Bishop Hall recalled in after years, he was only good enough for a Salvationist, and in some ways not good enough for that. His consecration was a farce. Chichemian soon grew tired of playing the joint roles of Mar Leon and the first Archbishop of the Free Protestant Episcopal Church of England, combined with that of the Primate of the United Armenian Catholic Church in the British Isles during interludes. He found them too exhausting, and after 2 years reverted to lay status. He migrated to Tunbridge Wells, where he ran a shop for the sale of beads and bijouterie. The former Catholic Armenian Vartapet ended his days as a Baptist and died a very old man in the 1920s. The next man to be raised to the episcopate of the elusive ancient British Church was Herbert James Monzani Hurd, headmaster of Raleigh College, Brixton, South London. He had been ordained an Anglican deacon by Lord William Gascoigne Cecil, Bishop of Exeter from 1916 to 1936, but decided that the priesthood of a church alleged to be the oldest in the world after Antioch and Jerusalem was preferable to that of the post-Reformation Church of England. Then followed a call from the Patriarch Mar Andres MacLachlan to proceed to the episcopate. It was on June 4th, 1922, that the latter laid hands on Mr. Hurd. The simple ceremony took place in what was then called St. Andrew's Church, Retreat Place, Hackney, where the Reverend William Hall conducted Sunday services for the benefit of persons in northeast London who found the neighboring Anglican places of worship too ritualistic and Romish. This consecrant was given the title of Bishop of Selsey. This schoolmaster prelate, bearded like his consecrator, was aged 65 when he became the titular successor of St. Wilfrid. He is remembered as having the appearance of an old country farmer, addicted to rough tweed suits, very bluff and hearty. It was in favor of the Bishop of Selsey that Mar Andres resigned the primacies of the ancient British Church and United Armenian Catholic Churches. Hurd again felt unable to take on the additional burden of ruling over the Free Protestant Episcopal Church of England. His own flock in Sussex must at best have been infinitesimal, and it is probable that it existed mainly in his imagination, which was exceptionally vivid. Behind Hurd's beard, bluff and hearty manner, and usually well-tailored suits, lay an artistic and romantic temperament. His level of churchmanship was neither high nor low, but rather infinitely comprehensive. As will be seen, he found room for almost all schools of thought. In his younger days, more than 20 years before he became an ancient British prelate, he was one of the founders of the Imperial College of Music. It was in 1907 that he formed the Order of St. James, the membership of which was open to all Christians. Having been initiated as companions or knights, its members promised to devote their lives to working among men, women, and children of all denominations or none. The aims of the orders were organizing religious, business, and social intercourse amongst people, irrespective of creed or dogma. At the monastery, located at 600 Green Lanes, Stoke Newington, the Reverend Brother James, Order of the Society of Jesus, conducted correspondence courses in music, arts, science, theology, and commerce. He also held professional examinations for accountants, herbalists, organists, music teachers, and others. Considering that the Bishop of Selsey was obviously a man of many talents, it is rather surprising that Mar Georges should write that, being a schoolmaster and not a man of business, nor yet an organizer, he did not know which way to turn. It was almost inevitable that he would make mistakes, and he did in fact make one or two very bad blunders. He had never yearned to be a bishop, but having been chosen and consecrated to the charge, he did his best to fulfill his obligations, leaving the result to the hand of God. Soon after Hurd had declined to take on the charge of the Free Protestant Episcopal Church, a man was found who appeared to possess all the qualifications of a bishop as given by Paul the Apostle in his first epistle to Timothy. This was the Reverend Mr. Widdows, minister of the Church of Martin Luther in Speldhurst Road, South Hackney, formerly the pro-cathedral of the ancient British Church, where Mar Theophilus used to pontificate according to the Book of Common Prayer. After a simple but no doubt reverent laying on of hands by Mar Andre McLaughlin, the new prelate was given the name and title of Ignatius, Bishop of Hackney. Unfortunately, it was soon quickly discovered that the metropolitan's past life had not been so blameless as had been supposed. The elders, quoting the words of Peter in Acts 1:20, said among themselves, "Let his habitation be desolate, and his bishopric let another take." As a result of the exposure of Mr. Widdows, the Bishop of Selsey became primus of the Free Protestant Episcopal Church of England, though much against his wishes. After he gave up teaching at Brixton, the fifth British Patriarch, as a few of his followers called him, retired to Broadstairs, Kent, where he tried to revive the moribund remnant of Mar Pelagius's Brittonic Church, its members being a handful who disapproved of the Anglo-Catholic type of services in the Neo-Norman parish church dedicated to the Holy Trinity. His beatitude also rented a room at 271 Green Lanes, Palmer's Green, and 13 as the offices of his patriarchate. For a time at least, this address was also that of the curias of the Free Protestant Episcopal Church of England and of the United Armenian Catholic Church in the British Isles. Towards the end of his life, Patriarch Hurd held the offices of Chancellor of the International Orthodox Catholic University and of the Université Philotechnique Internationale Nationale, but these organizations had in fact much the same scope as his Order of St. James, except that they granted degrees instead of diplomas. Andrew McLaughlin died in 1930 and was buried in Kensington Cemetery, his coffin carried to the grave by his 6 sons. The service was strictly Protestant in character and hardly in keeping with the deceased status of Mar Andrés, Patriarch of the ancient British Church. It was on Easter Monday, April 20th, 1930, that the Bishop of Chelsea performed his first consecration, when he raised to the episcopate a priest of the Church of England, Victor Alexander Palmer Hayman, giving him the title of Bishop of Waltham of the Free Catholic Church. The ceremony took place in St. Albans Mission Church, Leytonstone, E10, of which Hayman was in charge, and in the presence of the church wardens and the congregation. Considering that the new bishop was a militant Anglo-Catholic, it is surprising that he should have been willing to be consecrated by the primus of the Free Protestant Episcopal Church of England, as well as Patriarch of the ancient British Church, or that the latter should have been prepared to lay hands on him. Hayman withdrew from the Church of England a few days later. Dr. Wilson, Bishop of Chelmsford, must have been glad to dispense with the services of this insubordinate cleric. Hayman's idea at the time was that the Free Catholic Church, which he had founded, should serve as a sort of independent Anglo-Catholic body of an extreme type. He visualized it as a refuge for priests who were being persecuted by their bishops, and found it impossible to hold and practice what they called the full faith in communion with Canterbury. Those who recall Hayman maintained that he was a man of real ability, with a definite personality, well-read and widely traveled. Unfortunately, he could not keep on the rails when out of prison. As the Bishop of Waltham had no cathedral, he had to make do with a small oratory at Forest Gate, E7, which he dedicated to St. Cyprian. Here, on August 17, 1930, he ordained deacon and priest a certain George D. Figg, who, like his bishop, had been an ardent Anglo-Catholic, working in several of the famous outposts of the faith in London suburbs. Dr. Figg's conception of Catholicity was nothing if not free, because after his ordination he appears to have ministered not only in Hayman's little oratories, but also in certain Anglo-Catholic churches. On Easter Monday, 1944, he acted as deacon at the consecration of Mar Georges by Mar Basilius Abdullah III. The subsequent career of Bishop Hayman was far from peaceful. For a time, my Lord Victor held the position of chaplain to Sir Oswald Mosley's British Union of Fascists, in consequence of which he was detained in a concentration camp on the Isle of Man during the Second World War. By 1946, his Free Catholic Church had become an autocephalous tropus of the Catholicate of the West. After his release, he provided himself with a coadjutor in the person of Peter Ewart Odell Cheshire, who was consecrated, so it is said, on April 18, 1948. On May 18, 1949, the Daily Mail displayed a caption, "Primate gets 2-year sentence. Clerical garb aided frauds." The reporter stated that Victor Alexander Palmer Hayden, aged 56, described as a clerk in holy orders with no fixed abode, who styled himself on his notepaper as the Most Reverend V.A.P. Hayman, Doctor of Divinity, Primate and Archbishop of Waltham in the Free Catholic faith, was at Middlesex Sessions yesterday, jailed for 2 years on 6 charges of obtaining money by false pretenses from a number of off-license holders. The prosecution stated that Hayman, wearing a clerical collar, obtained money for advertisements for the Free Catholic magazine, of which he was the general editor, when he well knew he was not in a financial position to produce the magazine. Sir John Cameron, prosecuting, forced the alleged Archbishop of Waltham to admit that his palace was a basement room in a house at Kelross Road, Highbury, London, and in an alcove was an oratory which was for his own use. Hayman admitted that he had already been fined £20 at West Ham for obtaining money from off-license holders on the representation that, as the son of a publican, he was stated to be the son of an excise officer, he was able to get whiskey. It came out in the evidence that the Archbishop had been living by this and similar frauds for several years, relying on his clerical garb and plausible tongue, and also that he was living apart from his wife, who was a nurse. On the primate's release from jail, the church army, his college, and many old friends tried to help him. Money was found to take him to Canada or to any other part of the world where he could make a fresh start in life, but he insisted on remaining in England. He was determined to revive his Free Catholic Church, or rather to sponsor yet another schismatic sect, for on October 15, 1950, he reconsecrated George Forster as Bishop of Devonia in the Chapel of Our Lady, Battersea, Southwest 11. The new prelate was founder of the so-called English Orthodox Church, and he assumed the style of patriarch with the title of the Most Reverend Mar David, FICI, CSCN. The patriarch was set up at 170 Battersea Bridge Road, where was published for a time the Orthodox Catholic News. Having had nothing but bad luck for more than a quarter of a century with his Free Catholic Church, the Archbishop of Waltham still believed that it might be a glorious future. A number of young men must also have been convinced of this, otherwise they would not have accepted minor and major orders up to the priesthood at his hands. To ensure that the church would continue after his death on March 4, 1956, he consecrated Edgar Melville Barker as his coadjutor with the style of Bishop of Beulah. The new prelate's career had included brief associations with several religious bodies at one time or another. In April 1947, styling himself presbyter and canon missioner of the Christian Mission, the devotion of the Wishing Well, he was acting as honorary curate at an Anglican church in West London. 7 months later, judging from a letter on the printed writing paper of the Christian Mission, complete with an impressive coat of arms, Canon Barker had been raised to the episcopate, for he signed himself Bishop John Barker. It has been stated that he was consecrated on August 6, 1947 by Bishop Anthony Wilson, or King, then head of the Christian Mission at Leeds, who was understood to have been given some sort of Mariavite episcopal status. Then on May 27, 1950, his signature John Barker, priest, appears as Secretarius ad hoc of the Patriarch of Glastonbury and Catholicos of the West on the instrument of reconsecration of H.P. Nicholson as Mar Johannes, titular Archbishop of Karim, primate of the ancient Catholic Church. But Father Barker's associations with the Miracle Cathedral in Chelsea did not last long, because by 1951 he had become the head of a short-lived Apostolic Catholic Church with its headquarters at Queen's Park, Northwest 6. Eventually he transferred himself to the Free Catholic Church and was soon raised to the See of Beulah. Determined to force people to take notice of the Free Catholic Church, the Archbishop of Waltham again solicited advertisements for his magazine, but this time in South London, where he was not so well known. The result was the same. He was arrested, tried, and committed to prison. By this time, Barker had developed doubts about the validity of Hayman's orders, and is said to have informed one of his priests that he had better find another prelate to ordain him. Victor Waltham's health broke down in H.M. prison at Wandsworth, and he was moved to the nearby St. John's Hospital, where he died on October 6, 1960. The Metropolitan Primate's body was cremated at Streatham, the service being conducted by Archbishop Nicholson at Karim. Before Hayman's death, he appointed Bishop Barker as his successor. The second Archbishop of Waltham, not satisfied with being primate of the Free Catholic Church, now claimed that he was the administrator in England of the Old Roman Catholic Church, repudiating both Monsignor Shelley, Archbishop of Caerglow, and Monsignor Barrington Evans, Archbishop of Verulam. The former's Vicar General, Bishop Paget King, issued a statement on his claim in which he said, "Neither he, Barker, nor the prelates he claims to be in communion with in Germany and in America have any connection with the old Roman Catholic Church, although some years ago the people he mentions in Germany did apply to be received into our communion, an application which after due investigation we had to reject. We solemnly affirm, therefore, that these men have no connection of any kind with the old Roman Catholic Church in Great Britain." Archbishop Barker was not impressed, and on November 29, 1960, he summoned a high synod of the Free Catholic Church, when it was decided to enter into an instrument of union with the branch of the old Roman Catholic Church ruled over by Monsignor Kelly of Niagara Falls, New York. On December 11th that same year, His Grace of Waltham was solemnly enthroned in the ancient Catholic cathedral, Stamford Hill, North 15, by Mar Ioannis, Archbishop of Karim. He was given the official status of second primate of the Free Catholic Church and administrator for Great Britain of the Old Roman Catholic Church, no matter what protests might be made by Gerard Cairglow or Wilfrid Verulam. On July 14, 1962, these two bodies were legally incorporated as the Willibrord Association, Old Roman Catholic. On September 16th, the Archbishop of Waltham, assisted by Mar Georges, Patriarch of Glastonbury, and Mar Ioannis, Archbishop of Karim, consecrated Joseph David Overs as his bishop auxiliary. The function took place in the ancient Catholic cathedral. The versatile Bishop Hurd, in his status of fifth British Patriarch, reconsecrated sub conditionae on Whit Sunday 1938, Mar Frederick Harrington, founder of the Orthodox Celtic Church of the British Commonwealth of Nations. The purpose was to unite in one person all the churches claiming the Ferret and Valois lines of succession, said to number 20 million of the faithful in every continent. On May 16, 1939, Hurd, acting as Primus of the Free Protestant Episcopal Church of England, laid his hands on William Hall at St. Andrew's, Stonebridge Road, South Tottenham, appointing him Bishop of Middlesex and the Eastern Counties. This evangelical prelate then earned his living as chaplain to Abney Park Cemetery, Stoke Newington. Later on, he succeeded Hurd as Primus of this body, which severed all associations with the ancient British Church. The Protestant character of the Chichemian succession, as derived from George David Cummins, first presiding bishop of the Reformed Episcopal Church in the USA, was safeguarded by Benjamin Charles Harris. A quarter of a century after James Martin, founder of the Nazarene Episcopal Ecclesia, had charged him to feed the little free Protestant Episcopal flock in the Diocese of Essex, he chose three godly and well-learned men to be ordained and consecrated bishop, in the persons of Gordon Pinder, Charles Leslie Saul, and James Charles Ryan. In 1922, a small group of earnest Protestants founded a new body, which they called the Evangelical Church of England, with the object of starting parishes and districts without churches, and also where the local Anglican place of worship was encouraging what they regarded as idolatry and superstition. The first bishops received a laying on of hands by presbyters in 1923. By descent, they were from B. Price, as was a further bishop, W. Newton, in 1930. 6 years later, Newton laid hands on Gordon Pinder and Charles Saul, and on November 17, 1944, these two, with J.C. Ryan mentioned above, who had also been consecrated previously by presbyters, received episcopal consecration from Bishop Harris at St. Paul's Church, Outwood, near Radcliffe, Manchester. At this time, the sect had about 7 churches, mostly in the north of England. Pinder and Saul soon parted company, the former continuing to rule over the Evangelical Church of England. He was assisted by a certain Paul Scott Montague, who, finding himself down and out, had tried unsuccessfully to get paid work with Bishop Saul, as there was nothing doing in the south of England. Scott Montague was grateful to Pinder, who had 2 or 3 stipendiary churches under his jurisdiction, when he offered him a job as paid secretary. Before long, he was appointed archdeacon, and under his influence, Pinder's followers became more central in their churchmanship. The archdeacon dressed the part to the full-gaitered, hat with a rosette, and nothing lacking to impress the general public. A correspondence between the Venerable Archdeacon of the Evangelical Church of England and Dr. Rawlinson, Bishop of Derby, with the object of uniting this little sect with the established church, achieved nothing. After the failure of these negotiations, Scott Montague, still acting as Pinder's archdeacon, was reordained conditionally by Mar Georges, who appointed him legate of the Glastonbury Patriarchate. In 1947, he was reconciled with the Roman Church by Dombeat Griffiths, OSB, then prior of Farnborough Abbey. When Pinder died in 1951, there were 2 candidates to succeed him, John L. Bain and John Dugdale. The later was elected, and in the absence of a bishop, received a laying on of hands by other presbyters. After Bishop Saul had broken off relations with Archbishop Pinder, he formed a rival sect to which he gave the name of the English Episcopal Church, with its headquarters at 15 Newburgh Road, Acton, W.S., where he held services in an oratory dedicated to St. Mark. He became friendly with Mar Georges, Patriarch of Glastonbury, and on September 8, 1945, in the Cathedral Church of Christ the King, New Barnet, the latter, assisted by the Archbishop of Olivet, J.S.M. Ward, reconsecrated him sub conditione with the title and status of Mar Leofric, Archbishop of Sothronia in the Eparchy of all the Britons. On June 5, 1946, Mar David I, Patriarch of Malaga and Supreme Hierarch of the Catholicate of the West and the Americas, W.D. de Ortega Maxi, gave Saul a few more valuable lines of succession at St. Mark's, Acton. The followers of Mar Leofric were made yet more sure of the validity of his orders after Mar Timotheos Stumpfel, Metropolitan of Aquileia, had imparted the Syrian Gallican line on June 22, 1947. On November 24, 1946, Mar Leofric had acted as proxy for Bishop Earl Anglin James when the latter was enthroned in absentia in the Patriarchal Domestic Chapel of St. Aristobulus, Q, as His Eminence Mar Laurentius, Archbishop and Metropolitan of Acadia, and Exarch of the Catholicate of the West and the Canadas. Mar Leofric helped to reconsecrate several bishops of the Catholicate of the West during the 2 years that he was associated with Mar Georges, but his churchmanship was just as broad as that of Bishop Hurd, and he combined the part of Mar Leofric, Archbishop of Sothronia, with that of Bishop of Hayes, his original title in the Evangelical Church of England. As such, he performed several ordinations, including that of A. St. Denis Fry, whom he raised to the diaconate in 1946 and the priesthood the following year, having accepted the honorary presidency of St. Nicholas School, Clevedon, Somerset, where Mr. Fry was a master. In spite of all the episcopal blood transfused by a host of prelatical donors, Bishop Saul was reconverted to the simple Protestant faith of his youth and cast off what he had come to regard as the mummery and superstition of the Catholicate of the West. In February 1948, he was advertised as presiding over a meeting of the National Union of Protestants to attack the Church of England canon law revision, and Archdeacon Scott Montague wrote to the Church Times, explaining that Saul was no longer a member of the Evangelical Church of England, which by this time was hoping to link up with the established church and had grown more tolerant of high churchmanship. St. Mark's, Acton, and other chapels under the jurisdiction of Bishop Saul became refuges for evangelical-minded Anglicans who had been driven from their churches by sacerdotal or rationalistic teaching. The faith and worship of the English Episcopal Church fell into line with that of the Church of Ireland. The official liturgy is the 1662 Book of Common Prayer. On January 8, 1950, Bishop Saul imposed hands on D.L.T. Tolinar, originally a liberal Catholic priest in Holland, who became known as Old Catholic Bishop of Arnhem. On June 4th, that same year, he raised to the episcopate the Reverend F.A.W. Rutherford, formerly an Anglican incumbent, as Bishop of the South African Episcopal Church. Bishop Rutherford stated in an official publication that his church was not denominational but inspirational, also that any visiting minister whose tradition is that of the simpler ways of reading the Holy Scripture and breaking the bread in the unliturgical way is welcome to use the Holy Table of the South African Episcopal Church. After Archbishop Pinder's death in 1951, Bishop Saul's English Episcopal Church became associated with Dr. Bacon of Failsworth, Manchester, who had been consecrated as Bishop of Repton in 1943 by Dorian Herbert, Bishop of Caerleon, founder of the Jesuin or Free Orthodox Catholic Church, which by 1957 had changed its name to Ancient British Agnostic Church. For nearly 30 years, St. Mark's, Acton has been a Protestant oasis in a desert of Anglo and Roman Catholicism, proud to be regarded as the only evangelical church in the district, where, so it is said, the quiet, reverent atmosphere and simple prayer book services are much appreciated by an elite of Christians. Spiritual healing is done, and the former Mar Leofric, Archbishop of Sothronia, who has now ceased to style himself Right Reverend, writes in his Parish News, June 1962, that God is beckoning on the Acton congregation to a complete and full change of mind in order that they may be the thought changers of the world, so that they may rise in the spiritual life to the height of a spirit-filled experience. James Charles Ryan, whose original name was Joseph K. Shengalvaroyan Pillai, the third man upon whom Bishop Harris laid hands in 1944, had made his first trial of the Christian religion with the South Indian United Church. Later on, he was ordained by a former minister of the British Methodist Mission, and still later he founded an Evangelical Church of India. Within a year of being raised to the episcopate by the Bishop of Essex on the Evangelical Church of England, on August 25, 1945, he was reconsecrated sub conditionae by Mar Georges, Patriarch of Glastonbury, assisted by the titular Archbishop of Olivet, J.S.M. Ward, and the titular Bishop of St. Marylebone, W.J.E. Jeffrey, when he was given the title and style of His Eminence Mar James, Archbishop of India, and Exarch of the Catholicate of the West and the Indies. This stately function took place in the Cathedral of Christ the King, New Barnet. After a varied career in which he has played many parts, Mar James, under the name of the Most Reverend K. Shengalvaroya Pillai, acts as National Director of the Department of Interdenominational Relations in the American Holy Orthodox Catholic Apostolic Eastern Church, affiliated with the Orthodox Catholic Patriarchate of America, with his offices at the Chancery 247 East 126th Street, New York 35. Bishop Hurd had a wonderfully comprehensive conception of Catholicity and was so kind-hearted that he was always ready to impart either the Syrian Antiochene or the Free Protestant Episcopal succession to almost anybody who asked for the one or the other of them. On March 18, 1939, he laid hands on William Hall, giving him the title of Bishop of Middlesex and the Eastern Counties in the Free Protestant Episcopal Church of England. On May 20, 1940, followed the much more ornate reconsecration sub conditionae of James Dominic Mary O'Gavinian, who at the date styled himself Archbishop and Metropolitan of the English branch of the American Orthodox Catholic Church. About 3 years later, Mar Jacobus II became acquainted with Dr. William Bernard Crowe, Master of Science Ph.D. and Doctor of Science, London. This distinguished biologist had been ordained priest in the Liberal Catholic Church in 1935. Archbishop Harrington, primate of the Orthodox Celtic Church of the British Commonwealth of Nations, had granted a charter to the Order of Holy Wisdom, founded by Dr. Crowe, to present what was called the Orthodox Catholic faith to persons of theosophical and occult leanings in their own language, and in such a way as to make manifest that the teachings, types, and symbols of the older non-Christian religions found their perfect fulfillment and consummation in the person of Jesus Christ and in his church. This Kabbalistic order had 3 sections: the ancient Orthodox Catholic Church, devoted to purely religious activities; the Universal Spiritual Kingdom, covering noblesse and chivalric activities; and the Universal Rite of Cosmic Architecture, which dealt with quasi-Masonic affairs. It was obvious that this triune organization needed a bishop so that it could function as an autocephalous church. Dr. Crowe had hoped to be consecrated by Frederick Mar et Met, as Harrington usually signed his name, but he died on January 17, 1942. It was typical of Mar Jacobus' indifference to denominational and dogmatic distinctions that he offered to raise the founder of the Order of the Holy Wisdom to the episcopate. The ceremony took place on Whit Sunday, June 13, 1943, in the consecrant's private oratory at 4 Broadmead Road, Woodford Green, Essex, where he resided with his wife and daughter. At that date, the new prelate, who was given the name of Mar Bernard, Bishop of Santa Sofia, held the position of senior lecturer in biology in the Southwest Essex Technical College, Walthamstow, E17. His entry in Who's Who 1940 takes up 76 lines. Born in 1895, he had been educated at the Cooper's Company School. For lack of space, it is impossible to give a complete list of his numerous degrees, which include those of the London University University, the University of Wales, or of the learned societies with which he was connected. His offices included being vice president of the National Association of Massotherapists and membership of the International Phrenological and Psychological Institute. He was also a Doctor of Divinity of the International Orthodox Catholic University. His publications covered a wide range of subjects. In addition to numerous articles and reviews in biological, medical, and theosophical journals, he had published many books since 1926. Among their impressive titles are The Human Body as a Colony of Animals, The Principles of Zodiacal and Planetary Physiology, and The Morphology of Dreams. This versatile lecturer in biology issued a leaflet on the Festival of the Holy Wisdom, Sun in Libra, 1943 AD, in which he set forth the nature and objects of an order of the Holy Wisdom, Ecclesia Hagia Sophiae, which he had founded and which was in communion with the ancient Universal Orthodox Catholic Church. Those genuinely interested were invited to become members and read. The order is not a church, but an organization within the Universal Church, which seeks to reproduce as fully as possible within its own sphere, for the benefit of its members and humanity in general, the deep spiritual experience enshrined in ritual and symbols. It is particularly concerned with cosmic symbolism. It endeavors to teach the doctrines and practices of the ancient wisdom religion and to preserve such knowledge of value which has largely disappeared in the historical development of outer institutions. Being absolutely universal, that is, truly Orthodox and Catholic, it has access to the divine wisdom of theosophy, embodied in the symbols of all nations. It utilizes the knowledge passed on in the great streams of sacred tradition, not excluding those of the Far East, the Brahminic yogic, the ancient Egyptian, Zoroastrian Magian, Kabbalistic, Gnostic Masonic, Gothic Rosicrucian, Druidic Bacchic, Chaldean Buddhist Lamaistic, and Islamic Sufic. It has, however, no connection with any existing Masonic or Rosicrucian fraternity. This ancient and universal rite of cosmic architecture, universal spiritual kingdom, and institute of cosmic studies had for its special object the establishment and maintenance of a planetary and zodiacal temple of the universal religion, where suitable candidates would be prepared and enrolled by the Bishop of Santa Sofia. For the time being, a room in a dwelling house adorned with symbols of the planets representing the universe would have to serve for the celebration of one or other of the ancient mysteries in their primitive form. Thanks to the guaranteed Syrian Jacobite apostolic succession imparted to the episcopal celebrant, the faithful could now feel quite sure of their validity. It was explained, however, that whilst repudiating fortune-telling and similar superstitions, it encourages the study of non-deterministic astrology and dream interpretations, believing the same to be helpful to making an agreement with their use in biblical days. Seekers after holy wisdom were reminded that St. Thomas Aquinas had written, "The celestial bodies are the cause of all that takes place in this sublunar world. They influence human actions directly, but not every action caused by them is inevitable. To be forewarned is to be forearmed." In this esoteric order, there was a hierarchy of degrees of initiation derived from and analogous with that of the ancient mystery cults of the universal religion. The Grand Master, by virtue of a charter granted by Mar Frederick, Archbishop of the Diocese of St. George in England and Primate of the Orthodox Celtic Church of the British Commonwealth of Nations of the Vilat succession, was said to possess the authority necessary to maintain the status of the order and its members and to confer valid degrees of initiation. In the summer and autumn of 1943, most people were taken up with the advance of the Allied forces from Sicily into Italy, or the German retreat from Russia, or recovering from the Battle of Britain, and could not spare time to meditate on cosmic symbols. Few appear to have felt the urge to assist at the celebration of the ancient mysteries when the Bishop of Santa Sofia used a homemade crozier and 2 wartime thuribles fashioned out of coffee tins painted gold. By the autumn of 1943, Mar Jacobus II had reached the age of 76, and so we are told by Mar Georges, realized that the time had come to make provision for the future of his British Patriarchate. He summoned a synod of the ancient British Church, and at this meeting on September 9th, a revised constitution was promulgated for the benefit of its few adherents, the number of which was never revealed. The Venerable Patriarch had been greatly shocked by a notice issued by Mar Ignatius of Ephrem I on December 10, 1938, in which his beatitude had proclaimed, "To all whom it may concern that there are in the United States of America and in some countries of Europe, particularly in England, a number of schismatic bodies which have come into existence after direct expulsion from official Christian communities and have devised for themselves a common creed and a system of jurisdiction of their own invention. To deceive Christians of the West being a chief objective of the schismatic bodies, they take advantage of their great distance from the East, and from time to time make public statements claiming without truth to derive their origin and apostolic succession from some apostolic church of the East. The attractive rites and ceremonies of which they adopt and with which they claim to have relationship. The Syrian Orthodox Patriarchate of Antioch and all the East had dared to denounce one of these bodies in particular. The so-called One Holy Orthodox Catholic Church, as it describes itself, presided over, as it is claimed by the so-called Frederick Harrington, Metropolitan in the City of London, of 324 Hornsey Road. This body, like others in America which were mentioned, claimed succession through Valois, and some of them had, so Ignatius Ephrem maintained, published statements which were untrue as to an alleged relation and succession and ordination to our Holy Catholic Apostolic Church and her forefathers. For this reason, he proclaimed, "We find it necessary to announce to all whom it may concern that we deny any and every relation whatsoever with these schismatic bodies and repudiate them in their claims absolutely. Furthermore, our Church forbids any and every relationship and, above all, intercommunion with all and any of these schismatic sects, and warns the public that their statements and pretensions, as above, are altogether without truth." Frederick Mar et Met, otherwise Frederick Harrington of 324 Hornsey Road, London, had died on January 17, 1942, at the early age of 52, after suffering great privations. It is related that before Harrington's death, Mar Jacobus II had promised that sooner or later Mar Ignatius I would get a nasty shock, which would have the effect of a knockout blow at Homs on the Orontes, where he resided. The time now seemed ripe to deliver it. Accordingly, on Sunday, October 17, 1943, that which was to become known to history as the Council of London was held. While the Russians were bombing the Germans at Dnipropetrovsk and Dnipropetrovsk in the east-central Ukraine, major and minor prelates in the ancient British Church, British Orthodox Catholic Church, Apostolic Episcopal Church, Old Catholic Orthodox Church, Order of the Holy Wisdom, and Order of Antioch made their way to 271 Green Lanes, Palmer's Green, number 13, part of which was rented as an office for the ancient British Patriarchate. This was a pretty little semi-detached red brick house designed in the most Rococo style of the naughty 90s architecture, with high-pitched gables, coy little bow windows, and a riot of decorative trimmings in stone, wood, plaster, and half timber. Mar Jacobus, whose memory was erratic, forgot about this gathering and did not turn up until it was nearly over. The council was not reported in the Times or the Tablet. It was not mentioned by any newspaper, even ecclesiastical, anywhere in the world. But its acts, summarized as follows, were issued in a printed leaflet which stated, 1. The Council, embracing steadfastly the definitions of the 7 ecumenical councils and the holy apostolic traditions, repudiated the heresies of Monophysitism and Jansenism and all other heresies. 2. That in view of Ignatius Ephrem I having disclaimed all connection with the above-mentioned extensions of his patriarchate, lawfully made by his predecessor, the said Ignatius was no longer recognized as holding office, that in consequence of the Patriarchal Synod and many of the bishops in Syria and Malabar having adhered to the aforementioned, the right to elect to the vacant see was declared to be vested in the council. 3. That in order to prevent confusion with the followers or the adherents of the aforesaid patriarch, it was provided that the church within the rightful patriarchate of Antioch should no longer be called the Syrian Orthodox or Jacobite Church, but should be hereafter known as the Ancient Orthodox Catholic Church, and by no other name. That the original jurisdiction of the Patriarchate should remain as heretofore, but its extensions in the West were specifically recognized and confirmed in their rights, that the traditional name Ignatius in the official designation should be abandoned, and the name Basilius substituted therefor, that the full patriarchal title should in future be as follows: His Holiness Mahoran Mar Basilius and Sovereign Prince Patriarch of the God-protected city of Antioch, and of all the domain of the Apostolic Throne, both in the East and in the West. 4. Mar Bernard, Bishop of St. Sophia, Grand Master of the Order of the Holy Wisdom, was elected to the vacant patriarchal see of Antioch under the title of Basilius Abdullah III, to whom all bishops dependent upon the see of Antioch were required to make their canonical submission within 6 months from the date of the council, unless lawfully hindered. 5. The council support all legitimate measures for Christian reunion and exhorted the faithful to pray for this end. 7. The Council protested against Resolutions 27 and 28 of the Lambeth Conference 1920, which it regarded as an unwarranted attack upon the validity of the episcopal orders of many Catholic and Orthodox autocephalous churches and a hindrance to the reunion of Christendom. These acts were duly signed and sealed by the authorized representatives of the aforementioned ecclesiastical organizations. Considering that the notice issued by the Syrian Orthodox Patriarch of Antioch on December 10, 1938, had been directed specifically against all the sects claiming succession through the lot, and contained no reference to those claiming the Ferret succession, it is difficult to understand why the ancient British Patriarchate should have felt that the document was worth treating seriously, but this is how Mar Georges had explained the Council of London with remarkable ingenuity. In 1943, a division took place among the Jacobites, those who adhered to Monophysitism continuing as the Syrian Orthodox Church under the Patriarch Ignatius Ephrem I, whilst another section at the Council of London repudiated Monophysitism and Jansenism and elected as Patriarch H. A. Basilius Abdullah III and adopted the title the Ancient Orthodox Catholic Church. This was not a revolt against Ignatius Ephrem I, for he himself in 1938 had severed all connection with certain portions of his patriarchate, which, being left in a position analogous to that visualized by Canons 37 and 39 of the Council of Trullo, AD 691, had no alternative but to elect a patriarch, and at the same time took the opportunity to making their formal submission to the 7 ecumenical councils. By a deed of declaration dated 23rd of March 1944, the ancient British Church and the British Orthodox Catholic Church, all previously referred to, united with the Old Catholic Orthodox Church. The latter body was derived from the Old Catholic movement established in Britain in 1908 by the late Archbishop Arnold Harris Matthew, who had been received into union with the Greek Orthodox Patriarchs of Antioch and Alexandria in 1911 and 1912, respectively. The United Church adopted the title of the Western Orthodox Catholic Church and was constituted as the Catholicate of the West by the Patriarch Basilius Abdullah III, and thereupon became a fully autonomous and autocephalous member of the family of Orthodox churches with full territorial jurisdiction in Britain and Western Europe. This all sounds reasonable enough, but the fact remains that none of the dissident churches of the East, Orthodox, Monophysite, or Nestorian, recognized the Western Orthodox Catholic Church as a fully autonomous and autocephalous member of their respective families, or admitted that it had full territorial jurisdiction in any part of Europe. If the truth must be told, those so-called extensions of the Antiochene Patriarchate in the West were a chimera based on the tradition handed down from the 1860s that the apostate French Dominican Julius Ferret, having been consecrated Bishop of Iona by Mar Bedros, Bishop of Emesa, Homs, had been appointed by the Jacobite Patriarch as his legate in Europe, with the specific purpose of erecting an autocephalous British Patriarchate. To the objective observer, the so-called Council of London and its acts are of the stuff that dreams are reminiscent of, an Arabian Nights tale. For none of the prelates who took part in the brief session could claim jurisdiction over more than perhaps a dozen followers, and some of the churches had only a paper existence. They did, on the other hand, take themselves quite seriously. Wartime travel restrictions made it impossible for the Mifrain and the bishops of Aleppo, Beirut, Damascus, Jerusalem, and Mosul, each holding the title of metropolitan, to make their canonical submission to the new patriarch within 6 months from the date of the council. It is doubtful, however, if any of them felt called to repudiate Monophysitism or Jansenism, any more than the Malabar Jacobite bishops in India, who remained loyal to Mar Ignatius Ephraim I. So Mrs. Crowe did not have to entertain these Oriental prelates as their status demanded in the new Antiochene Patriarchate at Woodford Green. Neither did their presence add glamour to the celebration of the ancient mysteries in their pristine form, carried out by the initiates of the Ecclesia Hagia Sophiae in their planetarian zodiacal temple of the universal religion. The Venerable Mar Jacobus II is said to have been deeply impressed by the results of the Council of London. The moment had come when he could lay aside his many burdens. He was allowed to retain the See of Selsey, covering the county of Sussex, with the rank of Archbishop ad personam. He gave his consent to the election of Hugh George de Wilmot Newman, titular abbot nullius of St. Albans, as First Catholicos of the West, and in that status he was duly consecrated by Mar Basilius Abdullah III on Easter Monday, April 10, 1944. Somewhat later, Mar Jacobus II resigned his office as fifth patriarch of the ancient British Church in favor of de Wilmot Newman, on whom he bestowed the rank of sixth patriarch. The Brixton schoolmaster, Herbert James Hurd, who had done some very curious things since he became a bishop in 1922, died at Tunbridge Wells on September 9, 1947, aged 80. William Hall, the chaplain at Abney Park Cemetery, Stamford Hill, who succeeded Hurd in 1939 as Bishop Primus of the Free Protestant Episcopal Church, took good care that it did not lack pastors. In June 1950, he raised to the episcopate one of Mar Georges's former priests, John Bisarwick, who had made a name for himself as a faith healer. It is said that this latter prelate, who usually signed his name John of Petros, tried to emulate Mar Theophilus Stevens by reviving a form of Christian Druidism. Bisarwick is said to have laid his hands on several bishops, including Eric Smith, 1952, Jan van Maal, 1954, and George Haas, 1956, but little is recorded of their episcopal activities. Archbishop Hall, having lost his church at Retreat Place, Hackney, owing to site demolition, induced a patron to provide a deposit and a mortgage on a Methodist chapel in Stonebridge Road, South Tottenham, which became redundant in 1932, when the Wesleyan Methodists, Primitive Methodists, and United Methodists were amalgamated as the Methodist Church. He reopened it as St. Andrew's Collegiate Church, which served as the pro-cathedral of the Free Protestant Episcopal Church, as well as the accommodation address of the Nazarene College, which had passed to each Bishop Primus since its foundation by James Martin in 1890. Also registered here under the Companies Act was St. Andrew's Correspondence College, Tottenham Limited. The Chichemian succession now passed on to a few more staunch Protestant-minded ministers. Among them were Charles Dennis Boltwood, ordained priest in 1950 and raised to the episcopate on Palm Sunday 1952, and John Leslie Baines, an Anglican clergyman originally associated with Pinder's Evangelical Church of England, details of whose career in communion with Canterbury are still printed in Crockford. Bishop Boltwood took over St. Andrew's Collegiate Church from Archbishop Hall, thus relieving him of certain financial obligations. Before very long, the former Methodist chapel became the headquarters of the British Synod of the Ecumenical Church Foundation, with Bishop Boltwood as its president. It was advertised as a specific church pertaining to the Christian church throughout the world, ecclesiastical, evangelical, apostolic, and unsectarian. Mrs. Boltwood, Master of Arts, Doctor of Divinity, was raised to the rank of Archdeaconess. She and her Episcopal spouse were assisted in the synod by an archdeacon, chaplain, 4 deacons, and 6 deaconesses. All the 14 members of the synod had 1 or more degrees conferred by the College of Science, founded in 1942. It is improbable that many of the inhabitants of South Tottenham were aware that the Ecumenical Church Foundation, located in a back street off Seven Sisters Road, enjoyed the chartered rights of the innumerable academies and colleges, both in Europe and America, even in more distant continents, with which it was said to be affiliated. Few realized that the president had been honored with nobility titles, knighthoods of many ancient and Knight Templar orders, and over 100 academic awards, including gold and silver medals, etc., for his writings in theology, philosophy, literature, and in the arts and sciences in the fields of culture and art. Members of this foundation had to subscribe to the 39 articles of the Anglican Book of Common Prayer as the substance of their belief, a proof of its sound Protestant basis. The head of the International Synod was Archbishop Earl Anglin James, Doctor of Divinity, Licentiate of Divinity, KCG. This illustrious Canadian archbishop, who in the course of about 20 years has managed to collect more than 120 honorary degrees, not to mention countless fellowships in fine arts, applied arts, and music, has led an adventurous life. Born at Memphis, Tennessee in 1901, his father was a racetrack groom. The James family moved to Canada, where, having tried hard for 8 years to obtain a BA degree at the University of Toronto, young Earl Anglin gave himself his first degree in 1929, a fellowship of music, and managed to get his photograph published in all the city newspapers. 2 years later, he incorporated a National College of Music, Art, and Literature under provincial letters patent and named himself its head. Between 1931 and about 1945, he seems to have prospered by granting diplomas, degrees, certificates, and credentials of all sorts. In 1943, he told a newspaper reporter that he held the world's record for college degrees. His ecclesiastical career was equally remarkable, for starting as a simple Anglican layman, he acquired a doctorate of divinity and soon rose to the rank of Old Roman Catholic Bishop of Toronto, having been consecrated by Archbishop Carfora on June 17, 1945. Too busy with the professorial and episcopal duties in Canada to travel to England, Bishop James was enthroned in absentia by Mar Georges, Patriarch of Glastonbury, on November 24, 1946. The function took place in the Patriarchal Oratory at Kew, where James was given the style of His Eminence, Mar Laurentius, Archbishop and Metropolitan of Acadia, and Exarch of the Catholicate of the West and the Canadas. His Eminence managed to find the time to combine his exarchal obligations between the Atlantic and the Pacific with those of Dean of St. Andrew's Ecumenical Church Foundation and University College, London, England. Rather later, he assumed the status of Dean of St. Andrew's International Synod, which claimed 27 agencies around the world. In 1950, the Archbishop and Metropolitan of Acadia consecrated Grant T. Billett as Patriarch of a freelance Old Catholic Church in America, and so helped to pave the way for the foundation of several more sects with impressive titles. Even more incredible was the Archbishop's rise in the social sphere. Eventually, he claimed among other ranks those of a General of the Legion of Honor, Foreign Minister of Togo, Duke of Scala, Prince of Palma, Prince of the Irish Principality of Thomond, and Sheriff of Chicago. More recently, he took the title of His Excellency, the Right Honorable Dr. Sir Earl Anglin James, but he has not neglected his ecclesiastical duties, and he is now styled Laurentius I, founder, EAJ Peace Missions, Archbishop Primate. This organization, so he states, was founded to perpetuate and commemorate the memory of our Elmer Anglin James, the famous sportsman worthy of merit and honor, who gained fame of Queen's Plate of England and Duke of York Stakes, being associated with Baron de Rothschild of France. with its headquarters at Miami, Florida. The EAJ peace missions are said to have, besides the primate, an assistant archbishop, a bishop, a vicar general, and even an aide-de-camp, in the person of the Right Honorable Count Dr. Bruce Vickers. His Eminence still continues to award degrees and diplomas for almost every conceivable branch of knowledge, from his National University College, 62 Roxeter Street, Toronto. It has been reported that he maintains an ambassador at Washington, D.C., but this has not been confirmed. With Archbishop Earl Anglin James in Canada as its supreme head, St. Andrew's Collegiate College could boast of an international group of 18 patrons, each with impressive titles and degrees. Among them were Prince Amoroso d'Aragona, Ph.D., LL.D., Academia Phoenix and Minerva, Dr. Salah ad-Din, Doctor of Divinity, Ph.D., founder, world organizer of Gresco, Australia, Dr. Charles Lathrop Warren, Doctor of Literature, Ph.D., Grand Master of the Ancient Order of Ursus, and Professor Dr. Ing Don Alberto R. Palumbo, Biblioteca Parthenopaea, Italy. From the mother house of this unsectarian organization in South Tottenham, the presbyters, deacons, and deaconesses appeared to carry on an intensive system of spiritual education, including a dynamic prayer course, to help people to obtain that dynamic release, which brings and maintains success and prosperity. One of the leaflets issued proved how prophecy was being fulfilled by the spiritual cataclysmic movements in the heavens and on the earth planet. Archbishop Earl Anglin James, Bishop Boltwood, and his archdeaconess wife felt that this noble work should be recognized as wholly worthy and beneficial to our Queen and to the governments of the Commonwealth of Nations, and to the people in very truth. It is said to reflect that neither Her Majesty nor any of the sovereign independent states of the British Commonwealth of Nations took the Ecumenical Church Foundation under their patronage. Meanwhile, Bishop Boltwood had met Mar Georges, and they decided that it would be to their mutual advantage to cooperate. For one thing, his sacred beatitude, the Patriarch of Glastonbury, Cartroia, and Mylapore, successor of St. Thomas, Apostolic Pontiff to Celtica and of the Indies, Prince Catholicos of the West, and of the United Orthodox Catholic Rite, to give Mar Georges his official style and titles, badly needed a building in which he could carry out pontifical functions, not yet having managed to raise the money to erect a cathedral at either Glastonbury or London, or in any other part of his worldwide spiritual dominions. So he was glad to have the free use of the former Methodist conventicle in South Tottenham. On July 6, 1956, the Prince Catholicos of the West reconsecrated the Bishop of the Free Protestant Episcopal Church of England, giving him the status of titular Bishop of Thorney, also that of auxiliary to his beatitude north of the Thames.